My name is Cora Hayes. In the small constellation of my family, I was always the dimmer star, the one you had to look for. The brilliant, dazzling celestial body was, and always would be, my younger sister, Tessa. We grew up in a little house on Willow Creek Lane in Port Blossom, Oregon, a town perpetually damp with the scent of rain, roses, and pine. From our earliest days, Tessa was a sunbeam, her laughter a melody that could fill a room and spill out the windows. She was the child neighbors brought cookies to, the one whose name they remembered. Our mother, Catherine, saw herself reflected in that golden light. "She's the spitting image of me at that age," she'd announced to her garden club friends, a perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on Tessa's shoulder. It was a declaration that rendered me invisible, a quiet satellite in their shared orbit. And perhaps, in the universe of her heart, I truly wasn't there. I was a creature of quiet corners and the soft rustle of book pages. I learned to darn socks and embroider pillowcases before I mastered a bicycle, my small hands more comfortable with a needle than with handlebars. "Such a serious little thing," Mother would say, the words not quite cruel, but certainly not kind. They were delivered with a faint, resigned sigh, as if I were a faded heirloom she couldn't bring herself to discard, but didn't know how to display. When her friends visited, their chatter filling the house like the buzz of hummingbirds, it was always Tessa who was presented, a perfect blossom for admiration. I recall one misty Saturday morning when I was about 10. Mother was hosting a brunch, and the air was thick with the aroma of baked scones and strong coffee. I had carefully arranged slices of melon and berries on our best porcelain platter, my contribution to the affair. Dressed in my neatest corduroy dress, I carried the platter into the living room, my heart aflutter with a shy hope of approval. Mother's eyes met mine across the room. She gave a quick, almost imperceptible shake of her head and mouthed the words, "Not now, Cora." Later, as she cleared the plates, she offered a brisk explanation. "It's just that you're complicated, darling. The conversation is so light. You wouldn't find it interesting." The sting of those words was a lesson I learned early. To be quiet was to be complicated. To be thoughtful was to be an inconvenience. But my father, Samuel Hayes, was my anchor in that swirling galaxy. He was a man made of a different, quieter substance than my mother. He was a master carpenter, and he carried the scent of cedar and sawdust on his clothes like a second skin. For over 40 years, he worked at Artisan Guild Woodworks, a local workshop known for its handcrafted furniture. His hands, calloused and often flecked with varnish, were the kindest I had ever known. He was a man of few words, but infinite observation. He never missed a family dinner. He never forgot a birthday. He never raised his voice. While Mother showed off Tessa's latest drawing or a prize from the school fair, Dad noticed the small things. When I brought home a detailed botanical illustration I'd spent weeks on for a science project, he didn't just praise it. He carefully framed it and hung it in his workshop, right next to his most used tools. When Mother saw it, she'd scoffed gently. "Samuel, really? It's a school project, not a masterpiece." Dad had just smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his sea-gray eyes. "Every good thing starts as a project, Catherine." And the drawing stayed. He was the balance point, the quiet gravity that held me in place. When Mother bought Tessa a shimmering satin gown for the spring formal and told me, "Well, you're not one for dances, are you, Cora?" I would retreat to the workshop. Dad would be there, sanding a piece of maple until it was as smooth as silk, and the quiet companionship was enough. I would hold on to the simple truth: Dad sees me the same. That belief was the invisible thread that stitched my worth together. Adulthood didn't rearrange the planets of our family system. Tessa danced through her 20s and 30s, collecting experiences and accolades like fireflies in a jar. She pursued a series of creative ventures: freelance graphic design, a jewelry-making business, a yoga instructor certification, but nothing ever quite solidified. When a venture failed, Mother was always there with a ready excuse. The market just wasn't ready for her vision, she'd declare. Or her business partner was clearly intimidated by her talent. Tessa would nod, her smile undimmed, and drift gracefully onto the next shiny opportunity, her life cushioned by our parents' support. Meanwhile, I built my life with the slow, deliberate care of a stonemason. I became an archivist at Northwood University, spending my days in the hushed, sacred silence of the library's special collections, preserving the stories of others. I was the first to move out, renting a small apartment above a bookstore in downtown Port Blossom. I learned to change a flat tire, to budget my modest salary, and to find comfort in my own solitude. On weekends, I would drive back to the house on Willow Creek Lane, and with each visit, I felt less like a daughter and more like a polite house guest. But Dad always knew I was coming. The amber porch light would be glowing, a small beacon in the Oregon twilight. A fresh pot of coffee would be brewing, its rich aroma a silent welcome. "How are things in the archives, Cora?" he'd ask, and I knew he genuinely wanted to know. With him, I never had to vie for a sliver of attention. It was given freely, a quiet, unconditional offering. Our family was a delicate, unspoken ecosystem. Mother and Tessa were the vibrant, flowering vines, twisting together in the sun, loud and beautiful. Dad and I were the deep roots, holding everything steady from the quiet earth below. I never considered how a single tremor could rupture that delicate balance until the day it did. Dad retired at 65. There was no grand party, no gold watch, just a quiet finality. He came home on a Friday afternoon, his familiar metal lunchbox under his arm for the last time. He placed it on the kitchen counter, took off his work boots, and said simply, "Well, that's that." At first, his presence at home was a gentle comfort. The house was filled with the soft sounds of his new routines, the rhythmic whir of a saw from the workshop as he built a series of intricate birdhouses, the gentle scrape of a trowel in the backyard as he cultivated a small vegetable garden. I would stop by after work, and he would proudly show me his progress, a row of flourishing tomato plants, a newly repaired fence gate. They were small, humble acts of creation, but that was his way. He was a man who found purpose in mending things, in making the world around him a little stronger, a little better. Then came the morning that changed everything. A single misstep on the back porch stairs, a short drop of only 4 inches, slick with morning dew. His heel slipped, and he went down with a heavy, awkward thud. The sound was sickeningly final. He had fractured his hip. The surgery at St. Mary's Hospital was a success, but the recovery was a slow, arduous journey. He was a man accustomed to motion, to the strength of his own body, and the newfound stillness was a cage. He pushed himself in physical therapy, his jaw set with a familiar, quiet determination, but his body betrayed him. The muscle he had spent a lifetime building seemed to melt away. Within a year, the walker was replaced by a wheelchair. He hated the stillness. But I soon realized that Mother hated it more. It was an uncomfortable reminder of fragility, an unwelcome disruption to the polished surface of her life. "He just sits there," I overheard her complaining to Tessa one afternoon, her voice a low, frustrated murmur. "All day long, just staring out the window." Tessa, engrossed in a glossy magazine, nodded in agreement. "It's so depressing. He hardly says anything anymore." I stepped into the living room from the hallway, my heart a cold stone in my chest. "Can you blame him?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended but sharp enough to make them both jump. Mother recovered quickly, forcing a bright, brittle laugh. "Oh, Cora, don't be so sensitive. We're not saying anything dreadful. It's difficult to see him this way." But they weren't truly seeing him at all. They were seeing a problem, an inconvenience, a shadow that had fallen over their sunny lives. And so, they began to avoid it. The avoidance started in small ways. Mother's elaborate home-cooked meals were replaced with simple soups and takeout. Tessa, citing a sensitive disposition, declared herself unable to assist with the more personal aspects of his care, like bathing or administering his medication. Then the travel brochures appeared, tucked innocently into the mail holder. I found one on the kitchen counter, its glossy pages displaying a sun-drenched spa retreat in Sonoma Valley. Wine tasting, hot stone massages, guided vineyard tours. "This looks lovely," I said, holding it up. Mother glanced over from the sink, her expression casual. "Yes, Tessa and I were thinking of taking a little trip. Just to recharge." A knot tightened in my stomach. Without Dad, Well, of course, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He can't possibly travel in his condition. So, who will be here with him? She waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to her task. You, darling, I assumed. You've always been so capable with these things. They didn't ask. They assumed. It became a pattern. Their little trips grew more frequent, dinners out, weekend getaways to the coast, sometimes without even mentioning their plans to me. I would arrive at the house to check on Dad, my arms full of groceries, and find him alone in the den, the television murmuring a golf tournament to an empty room. One evening, I arrived just as Mrs. Gable, the kind, retired nurse we'd hired for a few afternoons a week, was finishing her shift. She met me at the door, her face etched with concern. Is no one else home, Cora? No, Mrs. Gable. It's just me tonight. Oh, she said, her brow furrowed. I was told your mother would be back by 6 to help with his evening routine. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. It went straight to voicemail. I sent a text to Tessa. 2 hours later, a reply blinked onto my screen. Sorry. At a concert. Can it wait? That night, I bathed my father, my hands gentle as I navigated the frail landscape of his body. He kept apologizing, his voice a hoarse whisper. I'm sorry for the trouble, Cora. I couldn't speak. I couldn't bring myself to offer the easy lie that it was no trouble at all. The silence in the room was heavy with all the things I couldn't say. I tried to have a conversation with them, to establish a schedule for his care, a rotation for medications, for doctor's appointments, for simply being present. Mother sighed, a long, weary sound. Cora, I'm not a nurse. I have a life to live. Tessa, ever her mother's echo, added, and you're just so organized, Cora. You have the binders and the lists. It's really your forte. My competence had become their justification for indifference. I should have sensed that something more was shifting beneath the surface, but I was too consumed by the daily rhythm of caregiving. About 6 months after Dad's fall, I noticed that his monthly bank statements from Oregon Trust and Savings had stopped arriving in the mail. When I asked Mother about it, she waved it off. Oh, I switched everything to paperless. So much less clutter. It was a plausible explanation, and I let it go, though a sliver of unease remained. One afternoon, driven by that nagging feeling, I tried to log into his online banking portal, using the credentials he and I had set up together years ago. The screen flashed red, access denied. I called the bank. After a long hold, a polite manager informed me that the authorized users on the account had been recently updated. My name was no longer on the list. A few days later, I came home to find Mother on the phone in the kitchen, her voice bright with excitement. Yes, just charge the full deposit to the main account, she was saying. The Hayes account. After she hung up, I asked, my voice carefully neutral, what's the main account? She gave me a radiant smile. Your father's, of course. Tessa and I have power of attorney now. It just makes everything so much simpler. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Since when? Oh, a few months ago, I think, she said breezily. We needed it for some medical forms, legal things. You know how it is. You didn't tell me. She shrugged, her shoulders rising and falling in a delicate gesture of dismissal. It was all handled by the lawyer. We didn't want to bother you with the drama. Tessa, walking in with a shopping bag, chimed in. Don't worry your head about it, Cora. We've got it all under control. But they didn't. They had seized control, quietly and completely, wrapping their actions in the guise of practicality. And I, so focused on the immediate, tangible needs of my father, had never seen it coming. By the 2nd year of his illness, Dad's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the den. The afternoon sun would slant through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a gentle glow on his worn armchair, which had become a permanent extension of his body. Outside, the garden he had so lovingly planted was choked with weeds, and the beautiful birdhouses he'd built hung empty and silent. His words became fewer, but his love remained. When I came to sit with him, he would reach for my hand, his grip surprisingly firm, and ask, "How was your day at the library, Cora?" I had reduced my hours at the university to part-time. Mrs. Gable could only cover 3 afternoons a week, and the rest of the time, the responsibility was mine. Mother and Tessa had receded into the background of our lives, their visits becoming shorter and less frequent. Tessa was in between projects again, yet somehow perpetually busy. Mother had developed a sudden, convenient case of arthritis in her hands, making it too difficult to help. I eventually stopped asking. One Thursday, after a routine scan at the hospital, Dad's oncologist, Dr. Morrison, asked to speak with me alone. He led me into a small, sterile office, but left the door ajar. He didn't need to close it. The news he delivered was not meant to be softened. "Your father has late-stage pancreatic cancer, Cora," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "We're estimating he has months, perhaps not even a full year." When I walked back into the waiting room, my face must have been a transparent mask of grief. Dad looked at me, his gray eyes knowing and sad. I didn't have to say a word. He simply reached out and took my hand. That night, I sent an email to my supervisor at the university and resigned. There was no family meeting, no grand announcement. Mother didn't inquire about my sudden absence from work. Tessa simply remarked, "Wow, that's a big decision." For me, it wasn't a decision at all. It was the only path forward. The days that followed took on a sharp, precious clarity. There was no time to be wasted on resentment or sorrow. I pureed his favorite foods so he could swallow them. I organized his medications into a color-coded chart. I read to him from his favorite collections of poetry when his eyes were too tired to focus. One evening, while clearing out a drawer in his old writing desk, my fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope. My name, Cora, was written across the front in his familiar, steady script, though the letters trembled slightly. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Cora," it began. "If you are reading this, I suspect my own voice has finally failed me. I've watched you carry the weight of this family, my quiet, strong girl, and my heart has ached with a love and a regret too big for words. I want you to have this, what I was able to set aside. It's not a fortune, but it's a foundation. It's a beginning. Your life is your own masterpiece, Cora. It's time to start carving it. Take care of yourself first. You have done more than enough for everyone else. All my love, forever. Dad." Tucked behind the letter were a series of documents that made my breath catch in my throat. There was a signed lease agreement and a receipt for the first and last month's rent on a small, charming rental I'd long admired, Rosewood Cottage, a little place with a sprawling garden just outside of town. We'd driven past it once, and I'd mentioned how lovely it was. He had remembered. And I understood why he'd done it. Leo Farrell, the gentle, kind-hearted hospice nurse who had been assigned to Dad's case, had become a quiet fixture in my life. We had shared countless conversations on the back porch in the twilight hours, our hands wrapped around warm mugs of tea, finding a silent understanding in the shared space of anticipatory grief. It was not a formal romance, but it was a connection, deep and true. Dad had seen it. He hadn't pried or questioned. He had simply smiled one day and said, "You deserve someone who knows how to stay, Cora." And then, while I had been wholly consumed with the act of caregiving, my father had been quietly planning my future. Tucked into the envelope was a receipt for a deposit paid to the Oak Haven Pavilion, a beautiful, rustic venue nestled in a grove of ancient trees. There was even a wedding date, lightly penciled onto a calendar page for the coming autumn. He had done it all for me. For us. He had never mentioned a word of it to Mother or Tessa. It was a secret just for me. The day before he lost the ability to speak clearly, he squeezed my hand and whispered, his voice a fragile thread of sound, "Don't ask for permission to be happy, Cora. Just be." I held his hand and nodded, tears blurring my vision. Dad passed away on a Sunday morning as the soft Oregon rain pattered against the windowpane. I was with him. I had just finished changing his linens, smoothing the cool, clean sheets, when I noticed the rhythm of his breathing had changed, becoming shallow and slow. I sat down on the edge of his bed, took his hand in mine, and waited. His eyes never opened again. There was no struggle, no final gasp, just a single, soft exhale, and then a profound and final stillness. I called the hospice line. I called Mrs. Gable to let her know. Then I sat there for a long time, holding my father's cooling hand, not crying, not moving, just letting the silence of the room hold the shape of my love and my loss. When I finally called Mother, she didn't answer. Nor on the second try. On the third, she picked up, her voice bright and distant. "We're at the Rose Festival preview, Cora. Is it important?" "Dad's gone," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. There was a pause. "Oh. Oh, dear. Well, you'll have to handle things for now, won't you? We're in the middle of the city." And so I did. I made the necessary calls. I arranged for the transport. I began the process of filing the death certificate. I booked the small chapel at the edge of town and chose the flowers, simple white lilies, his favorite. Later that evening, a text from Tessa arrived. "So sorry to hear. Let me know the service time. I'll try to make it." The morning of the funeral was gray and misty. I arrived at the chapel early, arranging the guest book and greeting the few friends of my father's who came to pay their respects. Mother and Tessa arrived late, a whirlwind of black silk and expensive perfume. Tessa kept her dark sunglasses on, even inside the dimly lit chapel. They offered no words of comfort, no helping hand. When the time came for the eulogy, Mother walked to the podium as if stepping onto a stage. She spoke eloquently, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, about Samuel's quiet dignity, his unwavering devotion to his family, his sacrifices. I sat in the front pew, staring at the worn hymn book in my hands, the polished words washing over me, feeling hollow and foreign. After the service, I drove back to the house on Willow Creek Lane, a place that now felt like a museum of my past. All I wanted was to be alone in the quiet, to feel the lingering presence of my father. But they were already there, seated in the living room, a bottle of Chardonnay open on the coffee table between them. "We need to talk," Cora, Mother said, her tone all business. I stood in the doorway, my black dress feeling heavy and restrictive. "Can't this wait?" "I'm afraid not." Tessa held up a sheaf of papers. "This is a waiver from the lawyer. It just states that you agree not to contest the will. It's a standard formality to expedite the estate." I looked from the papers to their composed faces. "Dad was buried 2 hours ago," I whispered. "We're not trying to be insensitive, Cora," Mother replied smoothly. "But these matters are time-sensitive. The lawyer advised us to handle it promptly." "It's for the best," Tessa added, taking a sip of her wine. "Besides, you have your own life now. You're getting married, aren't you? Starting fresh." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told them about Leo, about the wedding plans. Dad had. And they were using his final gift as leverage. I didn't respond. Mother sighed, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "Please, Cora, don't make this difficult. It's been a trying time for all of us." A storm of anger and grief raged inside me, a desire to scream, to rail against the years of casual cruelty. But I was so tired. Instead, I walked to the coffee table, picked up the pen they had waiting, and signed the document. My signature was a quiet act of surrender, not to them, but to my own need for peace. No one said thank you. Mother stood, smoothing her skirt. "You'll need to have your things out of the house within 2 weeks. We've already been in touch with a realtor." I nodded once, turned, and walked out of the room. That night, I packed my life into boxes, the silence of the house a comforting blanket. I took only the things that held a piece of my father's soul, his favorite worn flannel shirt, a box of his woodworking sketches, and the manila envelope he had left for me. As I carried the last box to my car, the house remained dark. No one came to the door to say goodbye. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the landline number for the house on Willow Creek Lane, a number I already thought of as belonging to someone else. I hesitated, then answered. It was Mother, her voice sharp and brittle with panic. "Where is it, Cora?" I said nothing, listening to the frantic edge in her voice. "The money," she snapped. "From your father's savings account. The main account. It's gone. Nearly all of it." "What did you do?" I closed my eyes, a strange calm settling over me. "You have power of attorney," I reminded her quietly. "You and Tessa." "I haven't had access for over a year." "The account number was in his desk," she insisted. "But when we transferred it, there was barely $5,000 left." There was supposed to be a comfortable nest egg, Cora. Where is it? There was a muffled sound, and then Tessa's voice, high-pitched and accusing, came on the line. You found a way, didn't you? You took it. I didn't take anything, I said, my voice steady. You just never bothered to look at the statements. You never asked him about his finances. You just assumed the money would be there, waiting for you. I then told them in simple, direct terms about the cottage, about the wedding venue, about the small, deliberate expenses he had made over the last year. I told them about his letter. Tessa's voice cracked. So that's it? That's our inheritance? A wedding and a rental deposit for you. It was his choice, I said softly. He knew what he was doing. Did he think that made everything even? She whispered, the question hanging in the air, full of a pain she was only just beginning to understand. I didn't answer. Mother got back on the phone, her voice stripped of its earlier bravado, now thin and pleading. We have nothing, Cora. I prepaid for a European river cruise. Tessa quit her job. We were counting on that money. The house needs a new roof. We can't afford it. We need your help. Just for a little while. I thought of all the years I had been the helper, the fixer, the quiet pillar holding them up. You told me to leave, I said, the words coming not from a place of anger, but of simple fact. You told me not to make things difficult. That was different. That was business. No, I said, and in that single word, I felt a lifetime of boundaries finally click into place. That was exactly who you are. I ended the call and blocked the number. I never spoke to them again, but in a small town like Port Blossom, stories travel on the wind. The non-refundable cruise was lost. They tried to keep the house, but the necessary repairs were too costly. They sold it quickly, for far less than they had hoped. After the realtor's commission and closing costs, there wasn't much left. They moved into a small, nondescript duplex on the other side of town, a place with no garden and no porch light. Tessa had to find work, taking on a series of administrative temp jobs. The glamorous life she had envisioned for herself evaporated. Mother, I heard, tried to get her old part-time position back at the local plant nursery, but they had already hired someone younger. Their world had shrunk, just as my father's had, but without the quiet dignity he had possessed. Their story was now their own to write, and I was no longer holding the pen. It was never about retribution. It was about release. It was about finally, quietly, walking away. Leo and I were married in the autumn, under the sprawling branches of the Oak Haven Pavilion. It was a small, quiet ceremony, attended only by a handful of close friends and Mrs. Gable. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves, and the afternoon light was the color of honey. As I stood beside Leo, his hand steady and warm in mine, I wore a simple ivory dress. There were no empty chairs, but I felt my father's presence everywhere, in the solid oak beams above us, in the gentle breeze, in the quiet joy that filled my heart. We hung his letter, framed in simple cedar wood he would have liked, by the front door of our little rosewood cottage. The ink is beginning to fade slightly, but the words remain as clear and true as the day he wrote them. Take care of yourself first. Sometimes, when I come home from a day spent in the quiet archives, I pause before it. He didn't leave me a fortune. He didn't leave me a house. He left me something far more valuable. He left me permission to choose my own peace. And I believe, with all my heart, that was the point all along. Some inheritances are measured in assets and accounts. Others are measured in silence and strength. For so long, I believed that the quiet ones, the caregivers who do the thankless work in the shadows, have no story worth telling. But I know now that isn't true. Perhaps you, too, have been the one to pack the boxes alone, to pay the bills when no one else would, to hold a hand in the final, quiet hours. Perhaps no one ever said the words you needed to hear, and still, you stayed. If you have ever felt like a ghost in the story of your own family, know that this story is for you. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the boundaries you build to protect your heart. You do not have to defend the decision to finally walk away. But if there is a word that someone should have said to you, a word of acknowledgement that still sits unspoken in your chest, seen, valued, loved, enough, just leave it here in the quiet. We will hold it together.